Welcome to the Dump and Chase podcast. Robillard, Hayes, Forsyth, Chard, all with you today. Before we get into what you all clicked on the video for, just want to do a quick intro and to let you know and make sure you follow us on all of our socials to stay up to date on our latest episodes and posts. All of our links will be under this video in the description, or if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you find your podcast, it will be in the description as well. All right, you can obviously tell we're not in the studio today. We were going to try and figure it out, but really couldn't, and I'm kind of on bed rest right now. I feel like crap. So, before we get into our interview with Kyle Bukauskas, just kind of wanted to go over the JT Miller trade and kind of everything that's unfolded in the last week since we were last all together. I guess even the last 2 weeks because Chard was not with us previously. Hayes, to open the show, what are your thoughts on the JT Miller trade that's kind of been boiling for months on end at this point?
I think it's good for him to be reunited. I think he could spark that Rangers offense. Obviously, brings that physicality and whatever that they've been missing over there. So hopefully he can also unlock Zibanejad and Panarin. Hopefully give them a bit of a spark because they've been kind of slowed down in the production side of things. So if he can get them going, I wouldn't count them out of the playoffs quite yet. That's obviously a team who's got lots of talent and can easily win a couple straight here and make a case for themselves again. So not a team I would want to face for sure.
Forsyth?
I think it was kind of like a long time coming, almost maybe too long in a sense. Kind of hurt. I think it hurt the Canucks more holding on to him more than. I mean, obviously his first game he potted two. They still lost. I think it's a very high risk, high reward situation because you're bringing a player with a lot of locker room issues into a team that's had some locker room issues before. So if you're able to make it work, it could do wonders. But if not, you're kind of just out to lunch.
Yeah, and I mean, he was traded and let go from New York for a reason before. So, I mean, to reunite that, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But, Chard, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the Rangers had interest in Miller for like a couple of years now. Like when the Canucks weren't making the playoffs before last year, they were still asking Alvin about Miller. I don't know. Cale's probably upset the Vancouver Canucks captain got traded, but he can go captain another team and mess up that locker room. But Frank Seravalli did say that many players on the team were upset that they did trade JT Miller, which was kind of shocking to me, just because the fact that everyone kind of said he was the problem and he's like the shit disturber. But I don't know if I really like the return too much for the Canucks because they lose their second line. I mean, right now he would be their first line center because Pettersson's production's down. But I'm not too sure. I mean, if Pettersson comes back and he starts, firing off at like an 80 to 95 point pace again, it'll look great for the team because he's a lot younger and they just locked him up. But they got an injury prone Philip Hedl, which I really don't know if I like that. He's arguably one more concussion away from probably hanging him up, one more major concussion away from kind of his career being over. Then they got another young defenseman, Mancini. I like him. He's a pretty good ad. Just a good depth piece for this year. Can obviously grow into a top 4 role. And then they got that top 13 protected first, which I think they're gonna use it and they're gonna flip it. Oh no, they already did. They flipped it they flipped it in the Penguins trade and they got Pettersson and O'Connor. Yeah. So I mean, they already used it. Yeah, they had 3 Petterssons lace up on Sunday. Marcus and then 2 Elias Petterssons, which I think was pretty funny. But I don't know. I think the Canucks might regret this one unless Pettersson unlocks what he was seasons prior.
Yeah. Just watch JT Miller lead that Rangers team to the playoffs. Just watch it.
He leads them to the bottom of the sea.
I agree that he kind of was the heart and soul of that offense just because Pettersson wasn't doing anything. But I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say because we're not in that locker room and we can't tell if he's actually the asshole or it's just kind of, he's just trying to, I don't know, wake up Pettersson, but Pettersson can't take the heat. We just kind of have no idea.
I think it's kind of always been him as the asshole, not just on the Canucks.
Yeah,
kind of always been a lingering thing, but
it is true. But like they Spit and Chicklets had Barbecue Bruce Boudreau on their show, and they had a chance to interview him, and they said Miller kind of runs all the team hangouts. He organizes the get-togethers when they're going to people's houses. It's always his house they go to. So that's
why. You know what that kind of sounds like? Kind of sounds like a pretty good leader. You know what I'm saying?
Sounds like a captain.
Sounds like a captain. Some would say.
It sounds like a good guy. But then they said, but Boudreau did say when it hits the locker room, the switch kind of flips, and he's kind of like a whole different person. Because he had behavioral problems before with Bruce when he was the coach and kind of like that bubble and out of bubble year, and they had many chats about it, and they could just never figure it out with him and Pettersson. But now it kind of went to a whole new level, and now he's a Ranger again for the second time.
Yeah. Do we think that this ultimately turns into more trades, or for the Vancouver Canucks, like, do we think this fixes Elias Pettersson, the Swedish one, not in order for him not to be traded or considered to be traded, or does the Quinn Hughes thing start to unfold more? Does Demko start to unfold more? Like, do we think this is the end, or do we think this is just the beginning of all this? I'll go to Forsyth first.
Well, it's tough to say because, I don't really have a full roster right now. Like, Quinn Hughes is out for a good bit. I think it's the end for this season, at least, because that's just too dramatic of a change to make back to back. I think they'll give him another year at minimum, and then maybe the same time next year, if they're in like a similar spot they can't do, maybe they just do a quick retool, or at least try to, or maybe Quinn Hughes goes and plays with the other Hugheses.
That would be insane.
Yep, Hayes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're going to hold on to Pettersson and Demko. I think the most likely who's going to be leaving would be Besser, because there's obviously lots of teams interested in a guy like that.
Besser,
guy who can tuck 40, so you never know. Obviously, I'm sure they'd like to hold on to him as long as they can, retool, but right now, I think Brock Besser's got pretty decent trade value. Obviously, he's proven that in the past, so yeah, I don't know. I think, and like Demko, don't get me wrong, I think Demko could be traded because they have a guy like Lankinen who could potentially be a starter, as he has pretty much been a starter this year anyways. But obviously he had that hot start, so you never know. Obviously, Demko's the better goaltender, top 5 when he wants to be. But if he keeps getting hurt, there's not much reason to hold on to him. So that's all I got. So yeah.
Fair enough. Chard?
For like the likes of keeping Pettersson, this year his no move clause doesn't kick in until next year, so he can technically still be traded this year. So I think they have a really short time frame. They got to make up their mind. Like, there's talks, like they're very open about it. There's talks between Buffalo and Vancouver for like the likes of like Owen Power and Cousins. I think that would be that'd be a huge trade. I don't know if they're going to do it, though, because obviously the potential Pettersson has. But then Demko, no reason to trade Demko. I don't see a reason why they need to get rid of him. Shelovs was sick in the playoffs last year, but he couldn't stop a beach ball this year in the NHL. Obviously, super young, can't say he's never going to make it or anything. I think he'll be a solidified either tandem guy or backup. And like Cale said with Besser, he did get Cale and his Preds did get a mouthful of Besser last year, so they really can see what Besser can do. I don't know. I think if Pettersson's going to get traded, it's going to be this year, and it's going to be within these next few weeks leading up to the deadline.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, I think it's weird not having Vancouver being a dominant team, like especially after what we saw last year out of them. Like, I don't. It's hard to say what'll happen moving forward, but I'm in the belief that Pettersson will be moved. Brock Besser makes a lot of sense too. Kind of forgot about him as well. Um, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with Quinn Hughes. He's been taking a beating recently. We mentioned his hand last week. So obviously he needs a lot of rest, and we'll see what becomes of it. But do you guys have anything else to note before we get into our interview here? Or all right,
I think that's it.
all
Bring
right,
on Kyle.
yeah, we'll turn it over to Kyle Bukauskas and 32 Thoughts with Dump and Chase podcast. All right, I'll open the show. I know you were in Edmonton just a couple days ago. Are you back in Ottawa now, or where are you at the moment?
Yeah. Back in Ottawa now briefly, and then head out for will be the longest road trip of my season to this point here. Vancouver, and then Montreal and Boston for Four Nations, and then back to Toronto for another game before getting back home here. So a little bit of quiet here the last couple of days before it ramps up again.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to Four Nations, and what do you expect from that tournament?
I am. Yeah. Like, it just because we haven't seen like that type of event in a long time now. And, the idea of having, Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby together. And then, of course, Jesus, like Crosby gets hurt there the other night. And we'll see how that all plays out. Hopefully he's still able to go. But just different, players that have established themselves as, the top stars in the league over the time since, the last World Cup in 2016, that haven't had a chance to be teammates in this type of environment since that time. It's just been, way too long coming. I get the sense that like the players are into it. I know you can look at it and say like it's a nothing event. It's, there's only 4 countries in it. Is it, you can't call it a World Cup. You can't call it this. It's not the Olympics. Totally understand it. But I know certainly for like a lot of these, I would say for all 4, with an eye towards the Winter Olympics a year from now, there's certainly going to be some players here that where if they want to have a chance at playing in that one for an Olympic medal, it's important for them to show well here over the 3, potentially 4 games that they play over the week and a half span. So I know from that standpoint, like there's a bit of weight for the players involved. And, I really do believe, I understand, the time of the year that it's happening, it's a bit unique, but, once the first games get going and that first check is thrown, like there's going to be some good pace, and I don't imagine it'll take long for some bite to occur too. Like I've got some thoughts about, the fact that why they're doing it at this time of the year, and I hope going forward we don't see this again. But just to give us a taste of international, some degree of best on best here just before the Olympics to get that momentum rolling again. Like I'm really looking forward to it.
We've been like so strived. Like I think we've never actually seen Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby and Nathan MacKinnon all on the same team. So I'm really looking forward to that in an aspect. So yeah. I think it's going to be crazy watching that power play with like McCarr, McDavid, McKinnon. It's going to be lethal. And even with like the US, you got the Kachuk brothers with Matthews. Like it's going to be some high intensity hockey, I feel, and even some high scoring given the talent out there.
Right. And like, of course, the Americans have great depth in goal too, so that only adds to the challenge for everybody else. But I think too, like, think about that Saturday night in Montreal, Canada versus the US. I can't even begin to imagine like how wired the Americans are going to be to like want to beat Canada on that stage in that building. Like we saw in the World Juniors, like how locked in USA was when they played Canada on the US in Ottawa. Like there was like no question they were not going to be denied. Like they were going to be the spoilers there and soak in every minute of it. I can very much see, a similar regard, Team USA having that same kind of mindset going into that game against Canada in Montreal. Like I think it's going to be fantastic to watch.
And kind of with these Four Nations tournaments, do you think these big trades and all these huge moves that have been going on kind of have a play into that, and like the big break coming up and kind of how that's all played out?
I do. Absolutely. I think certainly like you go back to the Rantanen one. I think, as time has shown here, like Colorado clearly they didn't feel progress was going in the direction they'd hoped for like a new contract with Rantanen. And they also were looking at, as you say, like the Four Nations, or even if it was a club team game between then and the trade deadline. I don't think they wanted the risk of something happening to Rantanen, and now you got an injury and it completely changes the game. And the closer you get to deadline, well, the leverage starts to shift towards the teams that could be inquiring about the player. So I think they wanted, just to, all right, they found a deal that they were happy with. Let's get it done and cut bait and move on while they still could. And then you're seeing it a few other places. Obviously, like the JT Miller one in Vancouver, that's something that's been going on for a long, long while now. I don't know if it's as specifically tied to Four Nations, but it does feel like there's almost that kind of soft trade deadline or trade deadline light. Because of that, certainly if players that are going to be involved in that event are being inquired about and could potentially be on the move, those that currently have them under contract may want to get that deal done before that event plays out, just to avoid the risk of something happening. And then, the whole environment changes with regards to a potential deal. So there's like the kind of lead up to that one there. And then, the event happens, and then there's another week and a half before the actual trade deadline itself. So you can see kind of two different windows where there's going to be some more activity. I mean, it's already been a pretty good last week and a bit here in terms of transactions. We'll see how much more we see between now and next Wednesday. But there's almost like two separate kind of runways here, and I think it's absolutely tied to this upcoming Four Nations event.
And do you think Rantanen is going to re-sign with Carolina, or is it going to be another disaster like they had with Gensel last year?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not close enough to be able to say one way or another, like how he's really feeling. Like, you can tell it hasn't been a seamless transition, and you can see like just how shocked the player was that actually happened. So I imagine like now you not only did you play your entire career with Colorado, like you won there too. Like Craig Simpson talks about it as well. Like, he played, started in Pittsburgh and, but won 2 cups in Edmonton, and then, eventually finished his career in Buffalo. And he said like just the uniqueness of like, pulling on your socks to get ready and it's a different color. Your pants are a different color. Like, it's just all of that has got to be such an adjustment initially. Okay. Do we want to re-sign this player? Can we get him re-signed? And if not, all right, do we then look at flipping him off again before the deadline on March the 7th to, as you say, not be in a similar situation a year ago where, you make a big move for Jake Gensel. And I think that one of the issues for them is that, I think they had a chance to re-sign him, and I think it was just too late into that window prior to actually July 1st coming that they actually made a tangible offer. I think Gensel's company at that point was just like, it's too late now. Like, we're going to go to market here, and they lost out on the player. So I'm sure they learned their lesson from there. Tom Dundon, the owner there, as you guys are aware, like he's somebody who he puts, a value on a person or a certain thing. And like, that's what I feel this is worth. And I'm not moving from that. But I think there's also an allure for him and the team to have like that stud type player that they've got a lot of really good players and great depth, which is why they've been competitive every year. And with Rod Brind'Amour as head coach, but they haven't had like that stud difference maker like a Mikko Rantanen here. And here's their opportunity to, hitch their wagon to him long term. So I would anticipate, barring things completely unraveling for them, Carolina to take a healthy run and at least give them, good understanding if they have a shot at signing this guy or not.
100%. I mean, like, there's almost even more pressure too, because you traded a guy like Marty Nečas, who's like, he's an incredible player. He's younger than Rantanen. He's incredibly shifty. I've been watching a lot of games with Colorado, and you also give up Jack Drury. And I mean, I think you talk about that like depth piece with Colorado. Like, this is 100% a move that the Avalanche probably wanted to get that depth in. Like, they've struggled. I've seen their games. They played McKinnon and Rantanen as much of a first pair D-man. I mean, obviously there were some struggles with some players there, and you add Jack Drury, who's an incredible centerman, and they needed that depth center wise. They're one of the worst teams on draws. So I think it kind of works out for both teams. But like, there definitely has to be a lot more push this time with Rantanen, seeing how you gave up some big pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And just go back to your point on Colorado, like you're right. Like, I mean, if you look at who were the time of the trade, like who were the 2 forwards in the entire league that led in ice time? It was McKinnon and Rantanen, right? Like, even it was more than McDavid, more than Draisaitl. Like, Bednar played them a ton, and he had in the past too. Like, as you say, like they're very top heavy group. So I think that was part of it too, because I look at that Western Conference and like there's some real legit teams there. And unfortunately, with Dallas and Heiskanen going down there, that changes things a little bit for them. But there's some legit threats. And so you imagine for Joe Sakic and Chris McFarland there, as they're looking at kind of the landscape around them and going, okay, like it's great to have Mikko here. And yeah, potentially we could back up the Brinks truck and get him secured here to be an Avalanche for the entirety of his career, more or less. But do we look at the opportunity and say, can we really win with how we're constructed here, with how top heavy we are? So, you get, a really good player, as you say, and Nečas and, Jack Drury, who has looked excellent, I think, there since coming over in the move. Just now you're a little bit deeper. You may not have the same star power or same firepower as a Rantanen there to play alongside McKinnon. But it does help shore up the depth there for the Avalanche. So it's a fascinating world we're entering here too, especially with my colleague and co-host on the podcast, Elliotte Friedman, had the news there last week of where the salary cap is expected to go the next 3 years, like incredible jumps, and how teams kind of navigate having that extra influx of space to when it comes to signing free agents, and which players do they believe are worth doling out that life-changing amount of money to, or do they go for somebody else who maybe doesn't have quite the same price tag, but can help add to the depth of your team. It's just it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch here over the next few years.
Just shifting over to like another pending UFA, Mitch Marner in Toronto. With the new salary cap, like that Elliotte said, the potential of where it could go. Where do you see his AAV being, and is it going to be with Toronto?
Yeah, I think if they can all come to I don't want to say come to their senses, but just be level-headed throughout this process here. He should be a Maple Leaf for the entirety of his career. I do believe that. You've got a homegrown talent there that's become one of the premier wingers in the game, and just a great two-way threat with how he kills penalties. Right, finalist for a Selke. Just a really, really good hockey player you've got there that came from your region. So yeah, in terms of AAV, I mean, again, the one advantage that the Toronto has, of course, is the fact that they can do the 8th year, right? So you got Matthews who's north of 13, and obviously the goalposts were much different, then than it's going to be here now. I just wonder with his agent Darren Ferris, who it can be a tough negotiation with him, and when we saw it got really hard there in Marner's last deal, as Nolan. So where in terms of having that option for the 8th year, how does that help kind of balance out the money where you're looking at the ultimate number and you're saying we can give you this, then you're not getting this anywhere else if you sign for 7 years, and also be at a level that's valuable. It's a tricky one. I think, in terms of percentage of the cap, you could absolutely make the case that he's higher than Austin Matthews. Is he more valuable than Matthews? You could say no, but I think, part of that again is just, the time and the reality of the salary cap landscape when your time comes to sign a deal, right? Matthews went shorter term out of his entry level, as and so that put him in that situation to sign then. If he extended a couple more years, then you can only imagine if he was come up for a new contract this summer, what that number would look like. That just it's all part of the decisions you make. So I think you could absolutely make the case of a 13.75. Even if you wanted to say, yeah, we go 14 like you do with Draisaitl. I would say Draisaitl is to me, he carries a little bit more weight than I do, but again, different set of circumstances now as we understand where the salary cap could be headed, and all that's going to factor into the negotiation. So I think there's a deal to be done there for sure. Just comes down to who's willing to dig in the hardest to get ultimately what they want here.
Yeah, I almost have a sense that they're waiting until they see his performance in the playoffs this year, because it doesn't seem like there's been much traction at all for contract talks, at least from what I've heard. So I kind of just have a feeling they're just waiting to see how he performs in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, aren't we all? Right?
Because this is the best regular season we've seen him have over a while. He's playing a different way. He's got not too much grip, but he's throwing his weight around a little bit. Maybe it pays off in the playoffs.
Yeah, and we've seen them, string together some wonderful regular seasons in the past too, right? And it just hasn't always quite translated. So, and it's especially this year where they're playing a bit of a different style, as under Craig Berube. Like they're not the same offensive dynamo as they have been in the past. Now the top guys have been great. Don't get me wrong. Like I think it more so speaks to they just don't have the same scoring depth than in other years. But yeah, like I think for sure. I think regardless. You're probably I think you still want to consider having Marner as part of your group here moving forward, but the playoff performance I think is going to factor in at some point as well. I do agree with you there.
All right, moving back to kind of Elliotte Friedman and stuff. What was it like to get that call and kind of be asked to join 32 Thoughts, and just what's it like working with someone like Elliotte Friedman?
Yeah, it was 32. So it was last summer, and it was complete shock, right? Like only because I got the call 4 or 5 days kind of before things about Jeff had gotten public, and that Sportsnet was moving on for him, and because I had no idea. I went and I was at the draft in Vegas there. I worked it. I came back. It was just such a whirlwind end of the season last year because of how late the playoffs went. And I came home for like a day and then went back to Toronto just to help out in studio for July 1st, our free agency show. And then typically after that, I go into not working mode, right? So I remember I'm looking for they would always do a podcast for after free agency to just kind of recap what's going on, and okay, here's some things to keep an eye on as we head into the off season. And that never came. And I remember it was a couple of days. I'm like, well, that's weird. I wonder why they didn't do one. And then you just get busy doing other stuff, and it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. And so to get that call a few weeks later, I was like, wow. It was kind of presented to me as give it a few days. Let us know what you think if you'd be interested. And I'm going there's really nothing to think about. The opportunity to be part of something like that and to work with Elliotte and, because you got a sense over the last few years, just how big of a property that had become for them. And just as that show kind of grew in popularity, and obviously the brand that Elliotte has grown and worked towards over decades of his time in this business. It was a no-brainer. Of course, I'm going to say yes to this. It was terrifying, and still is, a scary endeavor in a lot of ways. Though I've gotten comfortable as we've gone along here. But it's a show that a lot of people, certainly those in the league, listen to, and it's a format and medium that I'm really not accustomed to. I've done this enough over the years where fortunate enough to be asked to come on as a guest on various shows, but to actually have co-host one of your own. Just not something I'm used to, the longer form type stuff. I never really did talk radio or anything like that for an extended period. I'm gotten so used to the TV side where you've got 45 seconds to a minute at most to try to tell your story, and every bit of it is so produced and you want it to all come together. So it's just been a completely different change of pace, and to try to keep track of everything that's going on around the league. It's been an adjustment, while also still lending your time to your other roles in working rinkside and stuff. Because as I said, it's not like I was bored doing that and had a bunch of free time. So working all then has just been naturally, it just comes with time, and I'm still working towards kind of being into a better rhythm of it all. But it was working with Elliotte has been a lot of fun. I've gotten to know him pretty well over the years. Us working together, we would be on the road for Stanley Cup Final and other big events like that, and between him and Bieksa and David Amber and the rest of our crew, it's a fun group to go just hang out with. So him and I have gotten to know each other pretty well in that regard, and now getting to work with them. Guys, it's fascinating. When we're on the road together and he's in that information gathering mode, and it's just phone call after phone call after phone call, there's text messages, it's just nonstop. And one thing kind of leads to the next. It is a sight to see. It is a sight to see. And I'm never in studio on Saturdays when he's preparing his headlines. But I hear it's a similar kind of scene there as he's working the phone and trying to get as much information and confirmation on certain things that he's chasing. It's quite the ecosystem that he's built for himself, and that's the key. He's gone out and built it and put in the work. So he's a guy who can grind with the best of them. He's much more of a night person than I am. It's sometimes, we'll be on the road and, we'll get together for dinner and he'll be like, I had a nap for an hour. And I'm like, I didn't know like you slept. Like I didn't realize you actually made time for that sort of thing. Because sometimes it feels like there is no time for him to do that. But it's a lot of fun. And Dom Shermati, our producer too, like another fun guy. So when we get on the road together, like it's great when it's one thing to have like a working relationship, but when you like being around the people at the same time too, in social settings or whatever, when you get the chance, I think that's when you've got something cool here. So very, very fortunate.
And kind of speaking with like your work with Sportsnet, obviously you kind of started right away from what we're understanding. I mean, here at SAIT, like you're kind of like the model student if you want to go into sports broadcast and they tell us about. So could you maybe go over kind of your path from calling Trojans games to working with the Senators?
Yeah, it was bizarre. Like, I did my 2 years there and like absolutely loved it. And the funny thing was I applied to SAIT and I applied to, at the time it was called Ryerson University in Toronto. It's under a different name now, but like applied to their 4-year journalism program. And that's where I really wanted to go. And I got rejected there. So like SAIT was kind of like the fallback. So I remember I was kind of like mopey about that, being like, oh my God, like the one place I wanted to go, like rejected me. Like, what does that say about where my career is going and any opportunity I had at making anything of it? So I go there for 2 years and like talk about a blessing of disguise. Like it was so wonderful. Met some great people there. I mean, met my wife there. And just some lifelong friends. And so my second year there, there's a woman that was running the communications for the athletic department, and she was only there because the person that was there full time was away on mat leave. So she was just there for the 1 year, and it happened to be my second year of school there. And this is now we're early March. She was like, because doing the Trojan games, I did as much as I could. And one thing I really liked about the school there is that, it was important to them to, have those games webcast for, not only important for the families and those of the student athletes, but also using, people from our program to help crew it, whether it was on the technical production side or the commentators. So I did as much as that as I could: hockey, basketball, volleyball. And so that's how her and I got to know each other. And so now early March, she was like, hey, I was back home visiting during reading break. And, I don't know if I've told you, but, my dad is like the news director at Sportsnet, and I had no idea. And so I was mentioning, your name to him, that, you're interested in sports and all that. And so he wanted to see some of your work. And I was like, wow, like at that time, I just thought it'd be the coolest thing to have someone in that position just to, watch my stuff over. Because I had been putting together a demo reel to start applying to jobs. I was a few months away from graduating. And just to get some sort of feedback, constructive criticism from someone in his position, I thought it would be just an unbelievable opportunity. So I sent it off to him, and he wrote back a few days later. And then the next day I got an email from a guy by the name of Scott Moore, who I didn't know the name or familiar with it at the time. He was the Rogers, the president of Rogers Broadcasting back then. And he said, hey, Mike English passed along your demo reel. And she went on to say, like, we want to bring you out to Toronto for an interview and an audition. And again, like I'm 6 weeks away from finishing school. Like we've got graduation coming up that June. And you get that like on my phone one morning on a Saturday. And I talk about like just flipping your world upside down. And so that was like, it was a right place, right time thing. Like, was there luck involved? Absolutely. But also, I advice for others that are trying to get into it, like that doesn't happen if I'm not, taking every opportunity I could to go do Trojan games or other things like that, where you get to meet people that, I mean, lo and behold, have a tie to one of the major sports networks in Canada. Like, you just never know who you meet along the way. And if you put yourself in situations to try new things and to grow and just a chance to learn, like, you never know, the alternative tentacles that end up, reaching out because of that. So that was kind of my first kind of connection with Sportsnet there. And later that spring, I flew out there for a few days, and I interviewed with some people. I did like a kind of an audition in their studio, and waited to hear over the summer. And yeah, Scott's gone on to do, different things now. I mean, he was a critical piece behind, securing the Rogers NHL deal that's been going on for the 11th season now that we're in. But he was a big, believer in me. I mean, I was 20 years old at the time. Like I would not have begrudged them for saying like, you know what, like you've got some potential, but you're just a little too young or too green. Like who would have been critical of them for that? I certainly wouldn't have, but he believed in me. He wanted to bring me in right away. And so I moved out October 1st of that year to Toronto to start working at Sportsnet. It wasn't on air right away, of course, but over the months and just being able to do different things, like I would voice highlights for them back when they would still do the overnight highlight loop on what was originally The Score, now Sportsnet 360, and then starting to do some just kind of practice stories in the field that they would screen internally, and got to the point where they were comfortable enough having me file stories for, at the time, Sportsnet Connected. And then just bit by bit, I got more and more opportunity. They moved me out to Ottawa for 2 years, just as like kind of the bureau reporter, and then you get your first opportunity to work on like live event type stuff. This was back when Sportsnet still had the Canadian Hockey League rights. So every Friday night there was a CHL game to do, and Sunday afternoon. So Rob Falls was the typical host for that, but there would be weekends where he'd be away doing, curling or something like that, another event. So they'd need someone to come in and host. I got a chance to do a few of those, and just little by bit, more and more you get the chance to do different things, and you try to be as prepared and ready as possible. And you show that, hopefully you've got a chance at doing this a little more regularly. And then, I moved to Montreal in 2016. They asked for, they needed a new rinkside host for the Canadiens we still had the regional package back then. So that was my first kind of foray into the NHL side on a full-time basis, doing like the games on the broadcast. And then from there, it's just been, it's been a long while here. It's 11 and a half years total since I first started there. And just, really fortunate they took a chance on me early on, and have allowed me to grow here over that time.
Is that kind of where you started your Kyle Bukauskas notebook that you had for a little bit? And then why'd you kind of stop writing that when that was a thing back in the
Yeah, good research. You know what? I started it just as, I guess, something different to do. Like I really hadn't done any writing. And so they brought kind of the idea to me of like, would you be interested in doing something on the website? And, I'd thought about it and said, it'd be a good way to challenge myself. And, for I think 2 years, I think I did it. And it was, really just kind of about, just kind of some leftover, because you always go into every broadcast with a list of stories that you're prepared to tell, and you never get to all of them. You're fortunate to get to, 20-30% of them. But so naturally, there's still good information or anecdotes or things like that. And you want to still be able to share with the audience. So that was kind of the genesis of kind of how that came about. And then I think even, the COVID shortened year, the 56 game season in 2021, I believe I still did that a little bit then. And then why it went away, good question. Like I just, just time goes by, and and I clearly it wasn't on my radar, and I don't know, just no one from the web came back and said, hey, like let's keep this going. And certainly it was on me for not taking the initiative and saying like, I'd like to keep doing this. But certainly now, at least having the chance to be on the podcast with Elliotte, at least that can be kind of a vehicle for leftover stuff or things that I saw work in a game on a given weekend, to be able to share those things on the pod. At least it's not being left on the cutting room floor totally.
Yep. I mean, maybe you could ask Elliotte and join on the 32 Thoughts writing piece.
Yes, no, I know. He's having a tough enough time doing his blog every week here now too. So the problem is, it's like every time he's ready to post something, there's a big trade that comes out of nowhere and completely reshapes what he's doing. So I think he's still got that section of the market cornered there when he gets it out. So no worries on that front.
So do you have like any like kind of like a starstruck moment, like a kind of I made it feeling, like maybe in like an interview or just a game you've covered?
You know what? Like I will say, like I've never felt like I've made it. Just because, like, again, like things can change so quickly. Like it's always, you try to, at certain points, allow yourself to just kind of soak in where you are and what you're doing, and realize like how fortunate you are to be there. But I've never wanted to let myself get comfortable. Like there's always that mindset of whether it's the next weekend or the next season is like, okay, how can we be better? How can we, tweak some things to continue to be fresh and engaging with the audience? So that's always top of mind there. But like certainly like every year, getting a chance to cover the Stanley Cup final and being on the ice when that thing's handed out and you're seeing like just like a group of individuals come together as a team over however long they've been at it, like realize their ultimate dream, and you've got families out there that they're sharing it with, like just kind of being a firsthand witness to that. That's pretty damn cool. I remember, like we were in 2016 in the playoffs. That was a really tough stretch at Sportsnet. So it was the second year of the TV deal. And if you guys remember in 2016, we went from, I think there was 5 Canadian teams that made the playoffs in 2015. And so it was like, oh, here we go. Like, this is great. Like there's interest across the country. Boom, boom, boom. First year, tons of money being spent on resources and all that. And then 2016 rolls around and there were no Canadian teams that made the playoffs, right? Like all 7 missed. And so it was like the complete opposite. So I was still, myself and Dan Slater, who's our camera operator here in Ottawa, we went and covered the Pittsburgh Rangers series in the first round. And we weren't, Sportsnet wasn't doing the actual broadcast itself. They were just taking the US feed and putting it on our air. But they still wanted like post-game interviews and like a pre-game hit and stuff like that, just to have like some presence of us at the arena over the series. So I remember after like game 3, I was like, because we weren't doing the game, like there's a certain hierarchy for, okay, which network gets first dibs on post-game interviews for a player? Okay, then he's taking this player. Okay, who do you want? Okay, you're taking that player. Who do you want? Okay, you're taking that player, and down it goes. And I remember it was like Matt Murray was incredible. That was his first year kind of with the team and first of his back-to-back cups with Pittsburgh. I don't know if he posted a shutout or like he was really good. Like I think only gave up 1, if anything. So like I think, the US, the national broadcaster wanted him, like the Pittsburgh regional show, I think wanted Matt Cullen because he had a good game. And like French television wanted Chris Letang because, French Canadian. And I'm kind of standing there. They finally came to me. I'm like, well, I guess I'll take Sidney Crosby then. And they're like, okay. So like I like Sidney Crosby, like, it's like ultimate tumbling down the draft to me at 4th. So, being able to like interview him post game after a playoff game at Madison Square Garden, that was like, wow, that was pretty cool. And just not something you expected going into the night. So little things like that, like it's kind of neat. Like Paul Kariya was my favorite player growing up. When I was doing the Montreal games, Jason York, an ex-player, he was part of our broadcast team in the booth with John Bartlett. And we were out in California during the Canadiens trip through there late November of that season. And he played in Anaheim 2 stints, right, back when Kariya was the captain there. And they, were really good buddies then and stayed in touch. So, he went for dinner with Paul one night. We were out there. And so he knew that I was a big fan of his. So as their dinner was wrapping up, he was like, hey, come by this place. And so, set it up. So I got a chance to meet him and got a photo and stuff like that. And so that was like, wow, like you talk about just an incredible moment there all these years later. Like the kid he was like the true childhood hero for me, where like he was drafted the year I was born and he retired the year I graduated high school. You know what I mean? Like, so just like that perfect window of growing up. And he was, a fixture in the league when he was healthy, of course. So that was another really neat moment for me too.
I just want to ask for me and Dylan, the Ducks fan. We recently started doing play-by-play for just a local junior B team. How do you prepare for games like that?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've done play-by-play. I've been at SAIT with it the last time I did it. You know what? I think it's obviously it's understanding, as I've learned over the years. You can certainly from a play-by-play aspect, you can overdo it with information. Certainly, it's great that you do all this research and you've got all their numbers and stats and different things laid out, and you want to get it all in during the game because you want to show that this is how prepared I am, and it's all great. It all comes from a good place, but it's just important to remember that sometimes you just kind of gotta let the game flow as well. And so I think certainly you want to have like your whatever your preparation is. It's like the Jerry Seinfeld line, like never judge process. And so how I prepare would be different. How Chris Cuthbert would prepare would be different from how, a John Abbott or a Rick Ball would prepare. It's just everything, everyone has their own way. So find what you're comfortable with what jives with you. Is it something that's written on paper? Is it something you type out and print? Is it something on an iPad that you have that you take with you everywhere, or a laptop? But certainly I think obviously, just have, at least a note of each guy, and obviously the obvious is understanding who's on each team, and to be comfortable with who's what numbered for quick recall and stuff like that. But then just allow yourself enough time just for when you're actually calling the game, for the actual gameplay itself to breathe. Like, I mean, the ultimate, I mean, this is an extreme example, but like Bob Cole, like one of the greatest play-by-play callers of all time in like any sport. Like he would, his prep, like he would be, I mean, he would do some work, but we would beforehand, of course, and watch games throughout the week and know what was going on in the storylines. But when he would actually get up to the booth, like he had like it was like a laundry card that he would have like the two teams lineups written on the back. And like, he would sit down and, undo his pants a little bit just to allow the diaphragm to have free reign. And like, that was it. And then, and then at the end of the periods, he needed to know what the shots were for each team. But other than that, like he was watching the game and he was reacting to it. And for so many years, like it was absolute magic. I'm not saying going that far that way, but it's just like an example that there's a lot of different ways to do it. And it's finding kind of what you're comfortable with, where you're like, okay, I feel somewhat prepared, but also like allow the game to kind of speak to you as well too, in terms of how you want to call it.
Kind of try to build towards next year even.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. In a lot of ways, it's all just the beginning for you guys.
Yeah, and I just have another question, not related to this at all. It's about Ovechkin and the goal chase. Does he get the 17 more this year, or does he get it into next season? Yeah,
it's feeling like this year. Like seems like there's going to be games here now where maybe he's not making the impact that he hoped, but there's an opportunity for an empty netter, and you add to the total here and there just to help speed up the process. Like, especially it helps that the team's good, and so naturally you're in positions where you're a goal or two ahead late in the third period, and so the other team's going to be pulling their goalie. Like, I think just that alone is going to add a couple more to his totals, and I imagine like this break coming up here for him is going to be very beneficial. And we saw even just the All-Star break last season, he came back and he was a completely different player down the stretch. Yeah. So I wouldn't put it past him to be in a similar spot here this time around.
Yeah, and those empty netters like last night, he's got one with 0.1 left
right
on the clock.
All counts, exactly. All counts.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild.
Kind of moving back a little bit to kind of games you've covered and stuff. Bit of a two-parter. Do you remember the first game you were a rinkside reporter for? And what was kind of your favorite all-time game to cover?
Ooh. Yeah, first one was it was that Montreal year. They played in Buffalo on a Thursday night. That's where they opened their season that year. So yeah, Montreal-Buffalo was my first game. Montreal won. Al Montoya started. It was a weird, it was another bad year for Buffalo. I remember the day before, Eichel suffered, I don't know if it was a high ankle sprain or something in practice. It was really bad. So that was their start to the year. And I remember Evander Kane was playing for the Sabres that year. He got injured badly, was taken out of the arena on a stretcher that game. It was game one of another disaster year for the Sabres, unfortunately. But yeah, that was my first one there. And then in terms of favorite, oh man, a great question to try to pick one. I know recency bias will certainly come into play here, I understand, but game 6 of Edmonton, Florida last year, being in that building for that, and just the realization, oh my God, these guys are going to push this to a 7th game. That was sensational. And even it was such a bizarre year, of course, but the shortened season, the COVID year where Montreal went to the final, Game 6 there against Vegas, like when they won in overtime, like Arturi Lehkonen scored to punch their ticket to the final. That was one of the more incredible days. That was Saint Jean Baptiste Day, which is like a big holiday in the province of Quebec. So that was that day. There was a strawberry moon that night, and there was just like little things, because we were in like a quasi bubble for those last 2 rounds, because we were crossing the border, and you still weren't able to do that back then without, having a quarantine for 2 weeks. So they created like this bubble for us to allow us to cross the border without and still being able to work every game. But anyway, like, because you just with that, like, you were with the same people for like a month going back and forth, and it was such a grind, especially like Montreal to Vegas, like you're traveling three time zones, and there wasn't the second day off in between games. It was games every other day. So you're just running on fumes, and it was just one of those, but despite all that, you're fatigued. But it was like the producer I worked with then, Shirley Najak, we were kind of at the end of our run together. And then he went on to be the exec at CBC Olympics, where he is now. But we were like in such a rhythm when it came to creativity and coming up with stuff. I just remember, like, as messed up of a scenario that all was, and the world still was at that time. It was just one of my favorite times where like him and I were like at our optimum level of performance in terms of coming up with stuff each game. And just trying to be as creative as possible. And that was just a night where like everything comes together, and it was like, holy smokes, like Canadiens are going to the Stanley Cup final. And that was the first one for me that I had covered of like a Canadian team in the final. So naturally there's a tie to that. But and of course, the city, even with limited seating there, capacity wise, like the place was going crazy. It was wild out in the streets of Montreal afterwards. We had to take a bus back to the hotel just to avoid the craziness. It was just such a unique time, but it's in a way it was like the most rewarding too, because of everything that was kind of working against you that didn't feel natural or normal. Still to be able to do what you felt was good television at the time was a really neat thing.
So I think we're going to kind of jump back now to more kind of current day, and with the season almost like being well over halfway, do you kind of have like maybe somebody you think like a cup favorite, maybe a Hart and Vezina Calder winner so far?
Yeah, let's see here, a cup favorite. I'm still not there yet to say like Winnipeg is the favorite, like as great as they've been, like only because like they've lost their way in the playoffs the last 2 years. So it's like, can they finally like continue to play the style that's gotten them to this point when the games really matter? Like that's what I'm waiting on there. Still feel like, in the East, it could be, we'll see, of course, you get through the trade deadline and the landscape could be totally different. It feels like the East still goes through the Panthers, like until they're not that team anymore. And I wonder what they do between now and March the 7th. But it's hard to pick a favorite. Like I will say that's the one question that I wrestle with all the time. Like, especially because, we get to game 1 of the playoffs and, okay, so who's healthy? Like who's on a roll going in? Who's banged up? Like it's a completely different conversation than even right now, where you're deep enough into the year, you've got a sense of where every team is at. But I think Vezina for sure is Hellebuck, and Hart very well may be him too. Like we can't rule that out. Whether it's him or even a Draisaitl. Norris, I could see like Hughes winning it back-to-back years. It's too bad about Heiskanen. Like, I mean, he was having a great year with Dallas there before the injury. So with him now looking to be out for a good chunk of time, say that takes him out of the running. And then to me right now, like the Calder Trophy winner is in your guys' town there at Calgary and Dustin Wolf. Like I've seen a lot of Lane Hudson, incredibly impressive. Like Celebrini, it's like San Jose, as much as they don't win a ton of games, what a fun team to watch because of the just injection of life that him and Will Smith and them have put back into that market there. Like really, really good in terms of where they want to go. But as a goalie to potentially get the Flames into the playoffs and how big of a role he's played in all of it, he's my guy for the Calder at this point.
Incredible year, kind of just close-wise. Like, I mean, you look at the standings, like obviously I have a little bit more Ducks bias as a Ducks fan. Like they're even somewhat in the race, like up there, but it's been
trying to claw back, eh? Right. Big win for them over Dallas.
I know I think it's like their second win where they only scored 2 goals or less. Like,
Yeah.
it's been crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's been like the West is interesting, and then the East has just been unreal here. Like the wild card is one thing, but also the Atlantic Division, like it's far from settled either. Like with how Ottawa's climbed into the third spot, and Detroit's completely turned their year around after the coaching change. There's so much still to be decided, which is great. It's kind of what you want.
Hmm.
Yeah, for sure. As a Flyers guy, I got to ask you about Matvei Michkov.
Yeah.
Because you didn't list him, and I know he's kind of struggling as of late, but what are your thoughts on him and his kind of potential in the last 30 so games?
I think potential is like sky high. Like, I think over the course of the long term, I think he's going to be a really impressive player. But clearly there's like, and it's not just Tortorella. Like there's a directive from Keith Jones and Danny Briere on down to really like there's got to be certain non-negotiables about how you want to play if you're going to be a Flyer, and with that comes some growing pains. And so you make the trade there with Calgary and Kuzmenko coming, and there's a bit of history between him and Michkov over in Russia playing together once upon a time. So maybe there's a bit of comfort there as well on top of what he's had around him over the course of this year. But you do get the sense that as much as we've seen some battles that he's had with Torts here a little bit, which hopefully, you hope it's all healthy, like nothing is damaging. Like it's part of figuring out, both guys. And you go back a little while ago when Tortorella, and we saw that interview he gave with TNT and the answer he gave about Michkov and just how to coach him. God, you talk about insightful and enlightening there, like just how he kind of laid out about trying to learn the player and understand kind of what makes him tick and all those things. Like I was really wowed by the perspective he gave there. So clearly there's a willing to work with the player on a number of fronts. I think it's going to take some time here, and as the group as a whole, clearly, Briere has been patient, but now after making a couple of moves there, Farabee and Frost now being with the Flames, it seems like he'll be sizing up some big names come the off season to try to kick this thing into a different gear, and certainly not to the point where you're risking long-term damage for a short-term fix. But I think he, as like Danny Briere is a smart guy, he's a patient guy, but also somebody who burns to win. So I think he's starting to see there's an opportunity now to surround guys like Michkov and connecting and the like with some real legit complementary pieces. And that can help get that team to a different level, and Michkov's going to have a big part of that. I think they've done wonderful with obviously drafting him in the first place and convincing him to come over there, and now just throughout the growing pains, there's going to be some great moments here down the line to enjoy.
And, I think Sean, talking about Torts for a second, like the Athletic obviously recently dropped their player poll with some players. Torts probably the most polarizing coach. He's number one on the one you don't want to play for, and then he's still up there for one you want to play for. So, it's kind of want to see your thought on that. Yeah,
it's a real fascinating guy where there's so many players out there that just adored playing for him. And I think it just speaks to, again, how you're wired as a player. Can you handle hard criticism at the right time? And I don't think he's a guy who necessarily goes out of the way to grind guys. He's certainly not someone who's going to play mind games, I don't believe. But if he's not happy with something, he's going to let you know. And we're in a different era now where, a lot of players, growing up, they don't have experience with a lot of that. And so it can be a bit of a shock. And maybe, over time you can understand if you're in a situation where you're not winning a ton, it can be a lot tougher to digest as opposed to when you are winning. So I think that plays a role there too. But it's even interesting, with us, back when he was in Columbus, I covered the one playoff series there in 2019 when he was the head coach. And, as rights holders, as broadcasters that are actually doing the game, usually before games, if you want, you can get some time with, the head coach of both teams, away from the cameras and the microphones and stuff, just to get a little more insight into what they're feeling about things or any questions that you have. And so I remember Columbus, they would set it up where we would do that with John, and then he would go like to the press conference to do like regular media as you would see that would get posted on television and wherever else. So he would talk to us, and it was like, I didn't even recognize the guy. He was like so engaging and insightful, and just anything you wanted to know, like he would try to give you, somewhat of an answer, and just very helpful with all the questions that we had for him. And then like he would walk 15 feet to the left and sit down on the podium, and it was classic Torts. Like just everything was shut down, short answers, like there was no nonsense, nothing. So you just seeing both sides of it that way. There's just a lot of layers to the guy. But I do believe, deep down, he's someone who cares about his players, obviously cares about winning. And I think you're just seeing, in this different era that we're in, where there's still a lot of players in the league that, maybe grew up with a bit more of the old school mentality where, the tough love at times, and they're accepting of that. And then you've got, another group of players where they're going, nah, that ain't for me. And it's probably why you see the disparity for someone like John. Because he can be both ways at times.
Kind of I've heard quite a few stories about him, but I think one of my more favorite ones was recently when you're at your live show in Canmore and you had Bieksa on talking about him.
Yeah,
I thought that was one of the best stories I've heard, and I thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah,
the right guy explaining it too.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Right, like again, and as Kevin said himself, like there were times where he hated him because it didn't agree with how he was handling things or what he was saying. But now looking back, he's one of my favorite coaches ever, and I'm sure he's not the only one alone that feels that way.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, now that you mentioned Canmore and stuff, obviously we weren't able to go. I think we had school during the time when you had the podcast, and I believe the Saturday we were all kind of busy, but kind of what was that experience like to be close to Calgary again and be near the mountains and stuff?
Oh, the best. It was the best. Like it's one of my favorite feelings, like getting off the plane or getting out of the airport, either in Calgary or in Vancouver too, and just like taking in the fresh air. It's a really nice feeling. So I chauffeured Elliotte out. We were on the same flight to Calgary and then drove out to Canmore from there. He was on his phone the whole time, and he's like, "Do you want me to is this bothering you or anything?" I'm like, "No, this is perfect," because I was taking in the sights and sounds as we drove out there. He wasn't even a thought in my mind there, sitting in the passenger seat. It was a great setup, and it just was so good. Like the people, of course, it's a great reminder of how fortunate we are, and the reason why we're able to do things like that is because you've got passionate hockey fans everywhere you go. And they did a great job organizing and putting together, it's a whole week-long itinerary of festivities. It's not just the one day of Hockey Day in Canada that you actually see watching at home. But it was they did an excellent job, managing everything, and it's a small town. They don't have big venues for hosting different events, but what they did have, I thought they did an excellent job maximizing everything, and it was just neat to be back there. It really was. It's tough to be in a bad mood when you wake up to that scenery, and just good memories. Of course, driving through Calgary even a little bit with my 2 years living there. My brother lives in Calgary, so still got some extended family in the city, and we try to get back there as much as we can. So naturally, the memories from my time there come flushing back, and getting out to Canmore again was just a real special thing. It's the first time I've ever actually been on the site of where Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada is hosted from. So that was neat too. So seeing that, seeing how Ron McLean interacts with everybody, it's a really special experience that I was really fortunate to go be a part of, even for a few days there.
Only imagine it was that much more special because you got married there, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was great. I know, like my wife and I talked about, she was thinking of coming out there as well, but just because for myself it was such a quick trip. I mean, we got there Wednesday midday, and then first thing Friday morning, I was out. I had to fly to Montreal to do the game there on the weekend. So it was just kind of a too quick of an in and out to really make it worth the while for her to come out. But yeah, we did. It was again part of that, and fortunately there's a few colleagues of mine that came out for that wedding then too, and then they were back there for the event there in January, and just reminiscing a little bit about that, and just the fun party that turned into, all those things. It was just a great to kind of remind ourselves of what went on there, and just enjoy what was going on there this year. It was great.
I think that's it. Just thanks for coming. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you very
No
much.
worries, guys. Yeah, thanks for reaching out.
Cool.
Thanks for reaching out, boys. Yeah, all the best going forward.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, say hi to Elliotte for us, eh?
I will. Yes. I will, boys. All right, be well.
Yeah,
All
thank you
right.
very much.
Take care.
Thank you.